Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel, which is being webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, it will be available for viewing on the Council's website after the meeting. Please can I remind members to switch their microphone on when speaking and turn it off again when they've finished, please. I will explain to you that your regular chairman, Councillor Joe Orson, is not able to be here. He has slipped and broken one or two bones, I understand, and so we wish him a speedy recovery. And I'm sorry, but you're going to have to put up with me today. Could I also say, Could I also say that Councillor Rushton is substituting for Mr. Orson, and we also have apologies from Colonel Robert Martin. Moving to the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of July 2017, I'll go through first for accuracy. Page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and may I just have any particular items, if you wish, on matters arising? No? That's very good. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is public question time, and we have a question submitted by Councillor David Snart of Charnwood Borough Council on behalf of a member of the public regarding levels of policing within rural communities. Members of the panel will all have had a copy of this question, and this has been forwarded to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I understand he's going to give an oral answer. So, Lord Bark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I spoke to Councillor Orson last night and wished him well from the police side and from the OPCC, of course. I have with me today, many of you will, of course, know him well, Assistant Chief Constable Rob Nixon, who will take one or two of the items, particularly Darwin, number 9 on your list. But I think he also will have something to say about this public question. We're going to, if it's agreeable to you, do a written response to it within 5 days. But in order to respond to it verbally today, can I say, before I pass on to Assistant Chief Constable, a couple of things. We do take rural policing extremely seriously. This panel knows very well that we are suffering at the moment from too few resources in order to be able to do all that we'd like to do, whether it be in urban areas or in rural areas. In the last couple of weeks, last 3 or 4 weeks, I've held 2 meetings which relate very much to rural policing, one of which was with parish councils in Leicestershire and Rutland, who came to police headquarters where the Chief Constable and I talked to them and listened to what they had to say, which was extremely helpful for us. And only last week, the chairs of community safety partnerships around the county and the city came, and Rutland too, of course, came, and we had a very good, I think, 2-hour session, 2.5-hour session, where again they expressed to me their concerns, and we tried to respond as well. Rural, this is an area, Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, that is a real mixture, with a large city, and some considerable urban areas as well outside the city, and then some very, very rural areas too, and of course Rutland as well. So the problems we have to face are not quite like the problems some other police forces and police and crime commissioners have to face, where it's either overwhelmingly urban or overwhelmingly rural. We're neither. We're a mixture, which makes it much more interesting and much more diverse. And there always will be, both in the city and on this occasion from the rural areas, complaints that we haven't got the balance right in how we use our very limited resources. But we're doing what we can, and I'm going to pass over, if I may, with your permission, Chair, to the Assistant Chief Constable to give some practical examples.
Okay, good morning. And firstly, can I just say a big thank you. It's nice to actually come and see many people who I've worked with over the years. And I see that the question was submitted by David, and I obviously see David sat in the audience.
Lord Bach, Rob, just before you do it, could you just take your mic off?
Okay. I guess my starting point would be just an acknowledgement, and I know everybody in this room gets the general resourcing of policing, and when we get into Darwin, we'll start to see some of the impact of what that has looked like over the years. I guess my sort of reassurance to you is that rural crime is certainly not something which is not being taken seriously. And when we get into the Darwin presentation, a big theme for that is us looking at our new iteration of our operating model. And what you'll start to see is a big part of that, which is about decentralising resource. So in 2014, a lot of resource was centralised through economies of scale. What Darwin will go into, as we start to talk later, is very much around the decentralisation of that and putting people back out into some more rural communities. So starting to look at satellite locations around investigation and response. So by way of some reassurance, I get a sense that whilst we've been continually servicing rural communities, much of that has been from centralised hubs, and we're looking to decentralise that and have people based back in the heart of communities. So some reassurance that should increase some visibility. The second bit that I would sort of just share with you is we've also protected the neighbourhood policing. I don't know, obviously it was a big thing for Willie to protect our neighbourhood policing, the designated neighbourhood officers. Each of those are based in every community across Leicester and Leicestershire and Rutland. So, you know, a big caveat has been attached to that. And then the final bit that I would add is it's what we see as presence, because what we are seeing is there is a change in not just volume, but there's the complexity, and then there's the online. And if you start to look at a lot of our rural communities, there are a lot of people in those rural communities who are actually susceptible to a different type of crime. Identity theft, online crime, juveniles that are being targeted for sexual exploitation, much of which we're having to invest in. And there's a big online presence, which is also servicing those communities. So there's a combination of the visible assets going back out to rural locations, trying to respond to the changing nature of that crime in that community, and obviously protecting the neighbourhood policing. So I think that's some reassurance that we're taking rural crime really seriously.
Okay, Mr. Slater, would you like to ask any supplementary?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Lord Bach and Rob for their answers. Lord Bach kindly offered to send a written response in 5 days. What I'd like to do is reserve my supplementaries to the written response, if that's acceptable to yourself and to Lord Bach.
Okay, if you two will do that, all I will ask is that then, for the record, you let us have that so that we can put it on the panel's minutes, as done.
Certainly, yeah.
I'll send you in a copy of any supplementary, and if Lord Bach would also copy you in with any answer, that would work well.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. Okay. Agenda item 3. It's not that I'm going to take an urgent item, but I am going to change the agenda so that agenda item 10 is taken as the last item. so that our independent member who is here today may leave and not come back if she so wishes. Okay. Oh, no, but just to say that as a courtesy to you, Helen, we'll do it like that. Okay. Now, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda comes to the next item. Do any panelists have anything that they actually wish to declare?
Sorry.
Angela?
I said, in addition to my declaration of interest on the register, I want to declare interest that I have become the patron for Sound Cafe, which is a charity which deals with homeless people, based at St. Martin's.
Thank you, Angela. Okay, so 5, there are no items which I've decided to take as urgent, and so we go to the substantive part of the agenda, agenda item 6, which is a statement from the Police and Crime Commissioner in response to the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary's report, Leicestershire Police Crime Data Integrity, page 9 in your pack. Lord Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I will read out the statement. You will all be aware of the report by HMIC. Some of you will have read it, others will of course glance at the not too flattering headlines. There are a few observations that I'd like to make regarding this report and its, open inverted commas, inadequate, close inverted commas, conclusions. Firstly, while naturally I'm disappointed with the conclusions, I have to say I'm not that surprised. There are only so many financial efficiencies you can make before they become counterproductive and cracks begin to show. I've discussed what needs to be done to improve matters with the Chief Constable, and I am confident that active steps are being taken to address the key issues. I'm further reassured that Her Majesty's Inspectorate recognises the work to address such recording issues in the future, welcoming the improvements in the scheduling of non-urgent diary appointments to see victims of crime. Now all such appointments should take place within 24 hours of the report of a crime. Secondly, Leicestershire is not an outlier. There are similar findings for the majority of other forces inspected so far. Why? Well, there are some administrative anomalies that do need addressing, but I also think that the constant changes in crime recording are unhelpful and certainly confusing to the public. Last year, every force recorded an increase in reported criminality. It's expected that will be repeated this year. In Leicestershire, apparently we have incorrectly recorded around 21,000 crimes. But to me, the big question is, have the number of victims increased, or is this down to the requirements of the recording mechanism? In the main, I believe this is purely an administrative increase. Of course, I'm aware that some violent crimes were incorrectly categorised, and I am reassured at the work to address this. The most important point, in my view, is to make sure that we're doing the right thing for victims, that we are identifying victims of crime and providing the appropriate support and referral to specialist services where needed, and dealing with offenders more effectively than ever. I'm confident that the review of services I commissioned this year will see even better services available to all victims of crime. But we also have to look at the overall picture, and in common with many other police forces, we have seen a continual growth in demand, which in short means that we have moved from a typical day in which we dealt with around 750 incidents to today's norm of in excess of 900, and sometimes beyond that. I also understand that some of these inaccuracies can be attributed to the change in the crime recording system, moving to niche, and a change in the force operating model designed to produce savings. In essence, this report is not about quality of service, it's a narrative about the integrity of our administrative processes and the confluence between different IT systems. Project Darwin, And I break off to say that, of course, is an agenda on its own today. Project Darwin is looking carefully at a number of processes and systems to address this and other issues, and we'll be looking to implement changes that ensure our administrative work in recording crimes is compliant. We believe that there is need for more specialist units to undertake the body of recording work, but resources will need to be found to create such a specialist unit. Project Darwin will be exploring the best way of achieving this with the least impact on frontline visibility. Darwin will also see, firstly, the establishment of a triage desk in the contact management department. This will triage crimes as they come in and ensure they're allocated to the right team for further investigation. Secondly, the creation of a new Neighbourhood Investigation Unit, NIU. The force currently has a number of centralised teams who investigate crime. This change will see that investigative function put back out into the neighbourhoods and co-located alongside neighbourhood policing teams. Its aim to ensure the victims get a better service and to improve our investigative and local problem-solving capability. Thirdly, a review of response teams. This piece of work is looking at how many resources are in the priority response teams and where response hubs are located. No specific decisions have been taken about this as yet, but we do recognise there's a need to increase the number of officers working within this important frontline area of service. Project Darwin aims to implement an evolving policing model focused on improving our performance, our effectiveness and our customer service. It will also oversee the changes we need to make to our administrative functions in response to the report on the integrity of the crime recording system. Her Majesty's Inspectorate will return in 2018, next year, to inspect our progress. I know that you two will want to hear about that progress, obviously, so that with that in mind, I think it would be pertinent to bring a report to our December meeting, if you agree, Chair. That's the statement I wanted to read out, and of course, Assistant Chief Constable Nixon and I are here happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Lord Park. And thank you for the clarity around your actions. I'm going to open this now to the panel for any further questions they have. And Councillor Rushton first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Speaking as the leader of the County Council, I've prepared a few words to be read into the record. And the first thing I want to say is Leicestershire is not an outlier. In my view, is not an excuse. Overall, you've been rated as inadequate, with insufficient progress being made to rectify the problems identified in 2014, which are seriously undermining the effectiveness and efficiency of the force's crime recording. Overall, crime was under-recorded to the tune of 21,200 between August 16 and January 17, obviously very clearly on your watch, which represents 24.2% of crimes going unreported. Worryingly, these include serious and violent crimes such as sexual offences, rape and domestic violence. The report criticised staff don't seem to be aware of policies and procedures, with too many failures to make the correct decisions at the first opportunity. In my view, this is not a problem of resource. Police, unlike local government, have had their budgets protected from further reductions. Crime reporting isn't an issue of frontline policing, it's actually back office. The confidence of the public in the police to report it accurately is seriously being undermined. Public confidence in the police is massively important, and the PCC must do everything within his £170 million per annum budget to reinforce public confidence. So I'm happy for that to be recorded into the minutes, and for Willie not to answer straight away, but when he's done some others if he wants.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, we are of the understanding that there is a possible further HMIC report due to be... it's around at the moment. I've heard that from quite a good source. Are you aware of this? And if so, do you have anything to update the panel on? That's the first question. The second question is around the under-recording referred to in the HMIC report, focused on the most serious crimes, violence, rape and sexual offences. What awareness did you as the PCC have that this was a potential issue? What is your understanding of crime reporting in relation to other crimes, such as burglary or other property-related offences? And lastly, as your PCC, are you planning to revisit the police and crime plan regarding things such as priority and prolific offenders management, particularly in line with the fact that you are now looking at more of a neighbourhood investigation team, which would actually enable you to do more of that local work? Thank you.
Lord Bock, I'm going to let you answer those now, lest we lose the thread of those, and then we'll come back for the other two questions.
I thank both the those members of the panel who've spoken so far. In answer to Nick Rushton, we do take this report very seriously. I'm not trying to downplay it. It's not good news, but something we have to face up to. I wouldn't agree that we've had our funding protected, although I would actually agree that local government have had it worse. But that's not relevant really to the points you make. Yes, no, the performance has not been satisfactory and needs to be improved drastically. And Assistant Chief Constable Nixon will tell you what plans there are for that. Let me say something that may be slightly controversial. I'm personally not satisfied that the way in which the HMIC have done this inquiry and come to their 21,000 figure is satisfactory. And I'll give one example of why I don't think it is. And forgive me if it's fairly direct. The offence of modern slavery is a very serious offence and one we all are becoming aware of much more than we were. An example of how the HMIC have looked at this is as follows. In modern slavery, there are examples, of course, of modern slaves, young women, being put out to prostitution. The offence is modern slavery. That is the offence. What happens, of course, is that the modern slave, the slave is a prostitute, and the HMIC insist, and I can't for the life of me see why, that what the police have to do in that case is that every time that prostitute has a customer, that particular act of intercourse has to be considered to be a rape and recorded as a rape. That, to me, in the real world, is absolute nonsense. Very much doubt there's absolutely no prospect of a rape charge getting home against a man who has intercourse with a prostitute who is a modern slave. And so the numbers of rapes that are unreported, to use HMIC's analysis, is much too high. If you look at page 22 in the papers in front of us, you will see under modern slavery, 2 paragraphs in the middle that talk about this matter, and they are examples, and they have obviously been widened from the 15 modern slavery reports and the other 17 reports that are referred to in those 2 succeeding paragraphs. So the number of rapes that the HMIC claim we should have recorded, or police should have recorded, seems to me completely nonsensical. So I make that point. There are other examples, and I think that the Assistant Chief Constable may actually refer to that in due course. These were not rapes. They should not have been recorded as rapes. What they should have been recorded as is an example of modern slavery. having given that rather long example, that is not to take away from Nick's point that this is something that we have to improve on. It's something that the public will be concerned about. I absolutely understand that. And we are determined to do what is right in this instance. I turn to Helen Carter's questions, Mrs. Carter's questions. Now, I have nothing to update you on personally about a new report. Obviously, they'll come back and look at this next year, as I said in my statement. As far as the Chief Constable is concerned, yes, he came and saw me. As you know very well, the panel knows very well, it's not just that the report is published suddenly one day out of the blue. There are all kinds of events leading up to the publication of the report, and as soon as this was considered to be quite soon, the Chief Constable came and saw me, and I had obviously conversations with him and with other senior police officers, the senior team police officers, on a number of occasions. I am always present at the debriefings from HMIC in these cases, which is why I know a bit more about this than I might about others. I don't believe this applies to burglaries, which is the third question that Mrs. Carter asked, but maybe that Mr. Nixon can help with that. And I'm afraid I'm not in a position to answer that, the fourth question. I didn't quite, probably my fault, I didn't quite understand it, but maybe that Rob can deal with that.
May just before we ask you to answer, Rob, do you want just to come back on that, Helen?
Lord Back, I just have to say I'm quite horrified to hear you say that the examples where a woman has had sexual intercourse as a prostitute with somebody where they may be a slave, modern-day slave, actually isn't considered rape, because what would that woman maybe feel has happened to her as a victim? As a woman myself, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a woman either, I accept that, but I just find that unbelievable that you would make that statement. I believe that there are people that are being forced to have sex with people, and therefore, how else would you consider that? Just very bitterly disappointed to hear that. I have to say that I'm quite disappointed.
Well, I'm sorry you are, but if you just think about it for a moment, rape is a crime. Who's committing the crime? Is the person, the man who's having intercourse with the prostitute, is that person committing rape? How can he be? He has no knowledge. He is doing something that we may all think is a completely wrong thing to do. Well, I have particularly strong views on this. But how is he committing rape? We all know that the victim remains a victim at all times, and we want to do much more to protect victims like that than we've been able to do so far. But to call it rape is suggesting that each person, each man who has intercourse with her, is a rapist. And I think in law, or maybe it's a long time since I practiced criminal law, but I don't think there are many lawyers who would argue that they were guilty of rape. What would happen if they were prosecuted for it? They certainly would not be convicted of rape. So I'm sorry you're upset with me and what I say, but sometimes honesty is the best policy, and I think HMIC have got this wrong.
Okay. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to leave that there. You've heard Lord Bark. Rattilau.
Oh, sorry, are we going back to the other question about PPOs?
All right. There was a question which maybe Assistant Chief Constable Rob Nixon would answer, and I'll let you do that now.
Am I on? Yeah. Mr. Carter, can I just give you some reassurance? Because I can see just by that conversation how complicated some of the stuff that we're going to get into around the new National Crime Recording Standards gets. Some reassurance that all of the victims in these cases went through the full support that would be given to a rape victim. The technical issue that came is that they were down on the system as a modern-day slavery offence. So they were all categorised, but they weren't categorised as rape. But all of the victims, and I think it's really important I just stress, all of the victims got the full support of somebody that would go through a rape. So I just wanted to put it out there. It's not that they're not getting what they wanted. It is what goes on to the system. So that's the first bit. I think the other bit that I was going to pick up on is around the prolific and priority offenders that you alluded to. I mean, I've lived that journey, and many people in here will know that I was involved in setting up MAPON back in 2000 and how it evolved. I actually think we've got a prolific and priority offender scheme which is across sub-regional, so it's Leicester and Leicestershire. My worry is that some of the changes that have taken place in probation and CRC have left us slightly more fragmented than we used to have. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I think it's as good as it used to be, because I don't think it is. I think we're making the best of what is a new arrangement, and it is far more complicated than it used to be. But to give some reassurance, we have got our top offenders identified. They are getting multi-agency intervention and management. But I do think some of the challenges around new structures within probation, CRC, are causing additional work and additional pressures for us. And I can gladly pick up some of the wider ones, but I'm mindful of time.
Okay. If you'd like to come in, Nick.
To be fair to Willie, actually on the sexual offences, that you are actually higher performing on that than you were in some of the other areas. Although I'm a bit like Helen over there, it's shocking really to hear about how you treat the women who've accepted payment for sex that aren't treated as being raped. And I noticed that you do, as the Assistant Chief Constable said, you do counsel all the victims, which I think is very good. And actually in the report it compliments you on your treatment of the victims. In my view, the law should be changed. If people are paying for sex, I think that is rape, and ultimately I think somebody will have to deal with that. But if you go to page 25, one paragraph, we found that officers and staff, as I said, always seek to place the needs of victims at the heart of the crime recording decisions, but due to insufficient knowledge of crime recording requirements, many victims are being failed. So you're not training them to do it correctly. These included those occasions when officers attending reports of crime believed wrongly that victims did not want any formal action. I wonder why you didn't believe they wanted any action taking. But there was no need to record the crime. The absence of knowledge is exacerbated by limited supervision to challenge or correct wrong crime recording decisions. That probably is at the nub of it, that they're not trained well enough by the people higher up, because these are obviously back office people, to record the crimes properly. So I think I'll leave it at that, Chairman, and get a reply if you can give me one.
Gentlemen.
Okay, shall I pick that one up? I think there's two issues really that jump out at that. So one of the things that they found around with staff awareness was the requirement to actually capture and record crime. So I'll give you a scenario. We're dealing with somebody who is, let's say, a domestic violence victim or a sexual victim. That is, the partner is known to them. The first crime that gets recorded, so under old rules, and some of this around NCRS is the rules have changed. So under old recording systems, you used to do your primary record, you do the investigation over what can be, in some cases, multiple years, and there could be multiple disclosures during that period as to incidents that have happened. That all gets brought together as by way of evidence and would get presented to the Crown as a prosecution case. What the HMIC are saying now is that every time during that sort of background history, pulling the case together, every time an individual offence has been disclosed, the officers should then go in and put a separate crime record in. So if let's say, for example, it's a domestic violence, it's gone on for 3 years, there might be multiple 10, 15 incidents, we would capture as by way of one evidence, one statement with a primary record. What is now required is that they all get individually recorded. An assault on a Tuesday afternoon in 2015 should get recorded as an assault on a Tuesday afternoon in 2015, rather than between 2015 and 2017, this offender did this to this victim. So partly there is a shift in terms of the requirements around National Crime Recording Standards, which is requiring us to upskill some staff. Where we found that there's two areas of staff in particular that we're going to focus on. Some of those are operating in specialist areas, particularly around the sexual area of the business. And the other one, where it's alluding to where they didn't record some of the crime, we know that we had a managed appointment unit And within that, some of those are incidents that are getting reported, and they're really grey areas. People are involved in they've contacted the police, they've got a dispute with a neighbour, they want some advice, an officer goes around to speak to them about the advice. In cases like that, they may say, look, I just want some advice, what do I deal with it? Historically, they'd get the advice, and it would be closed as an incident. What we're now being said is, so if they make a disclosure that on a Thursday afternoon the neighbour swore at them in the street, we would be required to record that as a public order offence and then either record it but not do anything with it. So it's a recorded public order offence on our system. So the advice has been given, we've attended the incident, we've supported the victim, but in some cases there is some education as to what is required to go onto our system, and all of the staff are going through some refresher training around what National Crime Recording Standards requires.
Well, finally, if those are the rules, you should follow them, rather than make excuses why you haven't.
Well, can I just firstly say, they're the rules that have been set. I think we could have an entire conversation about whether those rules have been communicated. So an audit regime has been set, and we are all experienced enough to know that people come in and audit against one set of rules, but if those set of rules aren't briefed and understood by all of the forces, I think what's really telling is, Mr. Ruston, you said about it not being an outlier. There's only about 2 forces that have passed this inspection. So I just think, and I'm sat here saying that's our ambition, but the recognition is a lot of forces are failing this, and I sense there is a backdrop of the test has been set, but the syllabus hasn't been taught, would be my sense. But we're very quickly getting up to speed and putting in processes that will address it.
Thank you. I'm just concerned that you mentioned acts of domestic violence and the shift in recording that has to be done. And I'm a simple guy, really, and I look at that and say, well, the shift in recording for each one means, therefore, that you have to guarantee a response in each case to support a victim. And I can see why that has happened, and I can see why it might cause us some problems as a force if we weren't before responding to each one, just logging it and leaving it as a body of one. I can't really see that that's good policing, and I really do think that a guaranteed response in each case is what is required. How can you, Lord Bark, tell me that you've got a system in place which will do that?
Well, as I sit here today, I can't, but I can say that we're working towards it day by day, every day. We've taken this report extremely seriously, as you would imagine, and we're working extremely hard to make sure that whether we agree or don't agree, and you may well be right about the point you make about domestic violence now, that we do as we're instructed to do by HMIC, and of course we will do that. And that's what will happen. It won't happen overnight. There's some education that needs to be done, some training that needs to be done, as Mr. Nixon has said. But we are working towards it. I'm not in the slightest bit surprised that the panel is concerned about this. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't. But I want you to be. I do hope the panel has had a chance of reading the report and seeing where we are praised for trying to, as it were, make a bad position better, and that's specifically in the report. But to claim to you today that we have everything absolutely right, I couldn't do that.
Trevor, can I just add?
All right, but I've got lots more questions. But
just
if you wish.
Yeah, just to give some reassurance that obviously all of the victims would have been dealt with. So I think there's the thing about it's not that they've not been dealt with, it's the recording practice. So each one of those cases would have been investigated. So some reassurance on that. To give some confidence as to what we're doing, we've realigned our process. We've got a gold group that meets, oversees it. We've put a detective superintendent now in charge of our CDI process. We've got a recovery plan in place around it. We're looking at the interface at the front end to make sure we capture it. So there's a lot of work going on.
Thank you. I'm slightly more comforted than maybe your words initially would have led me to be. But it is important that we get of course, our public as protected as we can, and equally, of course, that it is known that we get across to the district councils who, of course, in terms of public order, do hold the community trigger as part of their response. And, of course, that is where I would suggest that just logging and leaving it is not an option. We need to know at district and borough at CSP level, because our CSP chairs who are sitting here will sign off that sort of action as required. Okay, this, as you might expect, has generated quite a lot of questions. I'm going to go to John Boyce.
Thank you. I find myself slightly confused by this, in that if we're not careful, the amount of crime is about to raise significantly, but without any more victims, and therefore the response may well change and actually not necessarily benefit the victims. So if the number of rapes goes up, should women be more fearful? The answer is probably not, because actually it's going up because of a specific reason. So I'm to some extent confused. My real concern is, how do we maintain in public that actually safety is not compromised by this report, or it's not identifying an area in this report which means that we are less safe? Because actually I don't think it does. I think it's a really complicated picture of you having to change the rules, which actually we all have to learn to realise that actually we're either better or no worse off.
Lord Barker.
Oh, thank you for that comment. Yes, it is. It is very complicated. It's absolutely vital that we think of victims first. Of course, that's right, and Carter's right to make that point too. Victims are the ones that matter, and how you deal with victims is something that the police have learned to do much, much better in the course of the last few years, as has, I think, society, the courts and society generally, and victims are absolutely crucial. I think it's important when you record a crime to know the way that you're actually doing it. My argument, for example, to say that every single act of intercourse, I'm sorry to go back to this, was a separate rape, it seems to me, the real offence is modern slavery. That's the offence. That's the one that police are covering. That's the one that the guy responsible for modern slavery is charged with. And it's best to be realistic in that way. But if HMIC in its wisdom feels that every single thing that happened to this poor victim who needs to be protected needs to be recorded as a separate crime, even though you would never convict the person who did it of a crime, so be it. We have to live with that.
Okay, thank you, Lord Bog. Councillor Rickman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with a compliment, because I was really impressed with the speed that the force actually made in apprehending the suspect of the terrible murder that was done in the Harbour District. So great congratulations on that. Obviously great concern there is on both sides and shocked by the figures in the report, but could you clarify how you intend to monitor the accuracy of crime recording by Leicestershire Police going forward? What methods are in place or due to be put in place to address this?
If I just go first, and thank you very much, Councillor Rickman, because I know it's in Harbour that this dreadful murder took place, and thank you for the compliment you pay the police, which is very, very well deserved. Of course, there's a suspect in custody at the moment, and so nothing else can be said quite properly about it. Thank you, though.
Okay, Ruth. Rob, I do apologise.
No, okay, I'll keep it really brief because I'm very mindful of time. Just some reassurance, we had an audit regime. We've aligned our audit regime to what the HMIC are, so that we're looking at the same thing. We've sadly had to invest quite a lot of staff. So the process, we've now got some additional staff at the front end. We've got local crime managers that will have a responsibility. And then we've got a quality assurance team centrally that will do quality assurance checks in line with the National Crime Recording Standards. Historically, we used to have that. We then took it out as part of efficiencies. We're having to reinvest it, but resource have to come from somewhere to do it.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Chairman. Look back, the HMIC report states that some of the officers were very reluctant to record some types of crime that young people may have committed in order not to criminalise them. I can see that this would have complications unless Leicestershire Police have a set policy on this, because it could lead to all sorts of inequalities and various rather subjective decisions, and I'm a bit concerned about this. So have you got a policy, and if so, what is it?
Thank you very much for that. I know it's a matter that the Assistant Chief Constable wants to deal with, the issue around young people and this report. So I'll pass on to him, if I may.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a really, really delicate area. You're right. We're looking at what that policy approach will look like. Can I put a bit of a case study around this for you, just to put it into context? HMIC are saying that we have a big emerging issue around young people receiving and forwarding on images of themselves in a naked state. Fact. Now, are they victims or are they offenders? So if a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old gets approached by a 13-year-old lad who says, can you send me a picture of yourself? And that girl does that, forwards it on, is that girl a victim or is she an offender? Is the person who asks for it and then forwards it on an offender? It's a really complicated area. The black and white audit regime around this is that actually it gets recorded as a crime. So they are facilitating and moving on an image of themselves, and therefore we should be recording that as a crime. I've got to be honest, I've got a 14-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son. I don't think that this is the sort of stuff that we should be prosecuting young people for. We need to educate them and prevent them. Clearly, if there's a sinister element to it, then we need to deal with that. So the particular area of where there is a reluctance of the force to record crime against young people, it's not that they're not dealing with it, but they're not putting them down as offenders, and they're not criminalising them. So we're going back and re-looking at that, and actually at a national level we are starting to flag up these concerns, because you know, it's how far you look. I know now, with my relationships with some of the schools certainly in the city, this is everyday occurrence, and if we're not careful, every day we could be recording crime against young people that are involved in it, and we need to support young people and prevent that behaviour in the first place.
Thank you. Can I come back on that, please? Whilst I applaud your rather pragmatic approach to that particular area of crime, what I asked was, have you got a definite policy on young people, and if so, are you aware of it, and what is it?
Just before you do that, I'm going to bring Manjula in on the same sort of thing, if I may. Manjula?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I welcome that you want supporting young people. So far, crime is taken. But you know, the city, county, we are very multicultural and diverse communities. And there is a big concern among BME communities that there are more and more young people who are being penalized, who get that if they commit anything, they don't get the same support as their peer other group gets. And like, I'll give you example, mental health, stop and search. And this is why some of them, out of panic, police chase, you know how they run because they see the police. Even last couple of weeks, two nights ago, there have been 6-7 youths been arrested. It wasn't their fault. They were just waiting to pick up their, because it was Navratri. So they sort of, in this thing, can we have some ethnicity data on this, you know, how you're helping all the youths?
Okay. Thank you. I think, Lord Bark, it's a matter of the policy that we're really trying to get at here more than anything else. And it's assurance around that policy and its application. If you would like to comment, and I think then that will be our last point, bar a general one I would wish to make. Thank you.
Of course, I hear in my job that there are concerns from young people in the city, particularly BAME kids, who think that they are picked on. I have to say that I've never seen any examples of it myself. I think there's been a lot of misunderstandings, particularly. I know there was some around the St Matthew's estate, where I took part in a meeting with some parents and police officers around it. But it's something I think the police are very, very aware of, that their role is to be completely equal and in the way that they deal with young people from wherever they come from and wherever they live. And that is very much the policy of the force. And if it wasn't, it would be changed very quickly by me.
All right, thank you. I did say that would be it, but I've had a couple more. Nick and Melise, and I'll do it in that order.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one brief one, Willie. Obviously, the integrity inspection is out and it's bad. Did the Chief Constable forewarn you that they were underreporting crime, or did it come as a complete surprise to you when the report came out?
Okay, go ahead.
It did come as a surprise, I have to tell you that. I'm not sure that he should have forewarned me. As soon as I knew the report was on its way, he'd tell me, but it did come as a surprise. Perhaps I should have asked the question a bit earlier, but I didn't. I was surprised when I heard it, I must say. Because I've always been sceptical about crime levels in terms of how it's been recorded publicly, not by the police, but just generally by the Home Office and elsewhere. And perhaps I should have taken more interest in how we were recording crime than I did. I'm certainly taking a big interest in it now.
Chair, can I just come
Okay.
add one bit to that? Yes. Because obviously it was quite... We didn't know. And I think one of the key things was that it came out that the methodology was different. So the time that we started to understand it was the time that Willie understood it. And I think the second thing I would like to highlight, if I may, Chair, is actually what the HMI said is there is no issues of integrity. So there was no deliberate will on the force not to record crime. And they made a big play on that.
All right. Thank you. I just wonder whether nationally HMIC would have let the Police and Crime Commissioners know of their change of inspection regime, which, of course, most other areas which are inspected, including CQC and Ofsted, of course, in schools do. But, however, let's just leave that one. Let's leave that question as it is. Melise, you have a question.
Thank you, Lord Mark. Of course, as you say, accurate reporting of crime is incredibly important to victims of crime, but it's also very important for safer community partnerships who use the figures to base their local plans on. Can you, as Police and Crime Commissioner, undertake to ensure the revised figures will be broken down into safer community areas, as this will give us confidence that our plans are based on the correct data? Thank you.
Lord Mark.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. I'm as, of course, the CSP chairs, again, sitting here, are absolutely delighted with that response. Thank you. It has proved difficult sometimes to get broken data or data broken down in such a way. I'm just going to say in general now that, okay, Lord Mark, I wasn't quite watching the television, but I was. So I guess, like most of the public, when the news comes on, we look at this and oh yeah, we know that. Oh yes, there's Lord Bark, yeah, our Police and Crime Commissioner. And what happened was you were reported with pictures up on East Midlands Today as, unless I got it wrong, as having said that the cuts in police funding equalled a crime wave. Now, I'm very simple, and it was 11:30 at night, and I would like you just to ponder that for a minute, and maybe you'd like to retract that view, if indeed that was what you were saying.
Chair, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Okay, the question I'm asking is that on the news, and you were reported, you were not quoted, you were reported, so let's be very clear about this, by a reporter, that the rise in police crime rates was directly due to the cuts.
I don't think this... My answer isn't relevant, I think, to the issue that we've been discussing, which is the recording of crime by the police. I think you're talking about the amount of crime that's gone up. Most people think it's gone up during the course of the last year, and maybe going up again this year. On that basis, nothing to do with this report, which I've already paid in, I think, is unsatisfactory, very unsatisfactory for us. But on the broader question that you asked, a really interesting question, I do think the consequence of year after year after year of less resource for the police in an area where the population is growing very sharply indeed and new forms of crime are emerging, I do think that has an effect on the amount of crime that there is. That's my own personal view. I think it does. I think if you don't give enough resource to the police, so you have too few cops, which I think is the position now, then I do think it has an effect on crime rates. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the report as it went out then is actually not really very accurate and isn't what you really said.
Well, I'm not sure who I said it to, if it was reported and not interviewed. But actually, my view is that if the resources are too low, the community will pay a price, and that price will be more crime, because there's not enough cops there in order to be able to deal with it. And I think that's a really serious issue, which the panel and I have discussed before, and which people have a view about, regardless of party politics, have a view about. Everyone has a view about it. If there are too few police officers, then crime will go up.
Thank you, Lord Bart. What I am then concerned about is the fact that the way sometimes that these things are reported are not made specifically clear, because they are complicated. And although you present it in a very straightforward way, it isn't quite as simple as that, because, as you know, patterns of crime have changed, and we're looking at child grooming, child sexual exploitation, and all those other backroom things which you, as a force, are also have to do. But it is simply, I put it to you, not quite the case, because HMIC did not actually say things about cost. They actually hit this report on performance and performance only, and they did not say anything about costing. And that's what I'm still concerned about, to bring it right back now to this report after clearing up your thoughts, and I take your thoughts about the lack of funding affecting frontline community policing, which is what we do in Leicestershire very well, and I still think actually we do it very well, Lord Buck. So I'm actually not going to go with you too much on saying that the cuts have made a vast difference. I just want your comments on that.
It's certainly, you're right to reprimand me. It is more complicated than I've said. You asked me a direct question and I answered it too simply. No, there isn't just a correlation. I absolutely agree, and I do think Leicestershire do community policing extremely well across very diverse area. But I do think that crime is going up, and that's my gut feeling is going up, and that serious crime is going up. The elephant in the room, of course, is cybercrime. Something we don't talk about really at all, because it's too big. It's happening all the time. And I think you, Chair, know my view, which is that there's a duty on government, whoever that may be, to take more of a role in dealing with cybercrime, as well as a duty on the local force and regional policing. But I take the point you make.
Thank you, Lord Buck. Of course, we did say that we felt that nationally as well, you, in your role as Police and Crime Commissioners, have a terrific amount of sway in terms of doing just that, and we would welcome you continuing in terms of cybercrime to take on board all the big guns that are making a lot of money out of the internet but actually aren't policing it properly. Okay, I'm going to move on then with the panel's permission to item 7, which is the report from the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner of Leicestershire. And Lord Bark, just a quick word.
Here I think we owe an apology to the panel. My Deputy Councillor Kirkmaster is actually in Brussels as we speak on a NATO-led visit by a number of people from Leicestershire. It's quite I think, an honoured thing to be on, and he, through me, apologises for not being here today. I hope, Chair, I think we talked about this before the meeting, and I think you have a very sensible suggestion, if I may say so.
Thank you, Lord Bark. As a courtesy to Kirk, I think if we hold that item over, and then he can come and be satisfied that whatever questions he's asked, he can answer to the best of his ability. Okay, so agenda item 8, an update to the 101 and 999 telephone services, which of course again are pertinent to performance. And I would ask Lord Bark to present the report, please.
I'm only going to say a few words about this. The panel, and we've discussed this a lot in recent months. Most members of the panel, particularly councillors, will have had many complaints about how the 101 system in particular has been functioning. A huge amount of work has gone on as far as that's concerned. It's absolutely central to what I have been doing. I've met with Superintendent Rich Ward. The item is in his name on the paper, and he is, if I may say so, an excellent police officer who's really gripped this issue. So I'm going to ask Assistant Chief Constable Nixon to tell you where we've got to with 101 999, because I know it's of great interest to the panel.
Okay, again, I'm very conscious of time, so I'll keep it fairly brief. I think you've read the report. I think what I would say to you is there was a combination of a few issues that needed to be resolved. Primarily, it was around resourcing, so there was some resourcing pressure within the contact centre. We've introduced a rolling programme for recruitment. I'm pleased to say that we are now up to establishment, so we've recruited the right number of staff. We've introduced a new shift pattern, which has aligned staff to the demand, and we're starting to upskill them. There's also a piece of work that is ongoing now around a new digital telephony platform that we're hoping to bring in by the end of November. And certainly I personally chaired a gold group basically meeting weekly and then fortnightly, and now it's linked into our force performance to keep a track on both the 9s and the 101. What we are seeing is that there are some real green shoots of improvement. The staff in the right location, aligned to the demand, with the upskilling that we've put into there, is starting to see a marked improvement. Our 9's performance is well above 90%, which is, given the fact there is an additional pressure that our calls for service in any one day used to be between 750 and 800. We're now having calls to service in excess of 900. So the volume of calls is going up. So not only have we increased our staff and aligned it to the demand continues to increase. And irrespective of that, we're still performing over 90% on the 9's. And we've seen a marked improvement on the 101. So I think it's significant improvement, and we're tracking it routinely.
Thank you. Councillor Osman.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate what Rob has said, and I think the reason I want to make my comments is I was a victim of crime 3 weeks back, and I had to dial 101, heard the chief speaking first, and obviously it was dealt with. I had to do it on a number of occasions, so I know for a fact it is working. Not only having said that, but they reported back in terms of updates and all the rest of it, and passed messages on. So from experience in the last 3 weeks, I'm just giving you my personal touch on it. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to hear the report back was good. I'm going to go to Rachel Al next.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm in the same boat as Councillor Osman. I was a victim early hours of the morning, and I had to make a 999 call. By the time I come from upstairs to downstairs, the victim was gone. But I was pleased with the response. That officer came within 6 minutes. They attended the scene. They drive around, and I'm grateful for that purpose. and although it's been recorded, but I knew the impact, or I knew the outcome of it, but I'm grateful for that. At least within 6 minutes they have responded, so I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Ratila. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. On the new digital system, is there an option there to prevent waiting times? Do you have a callback system at all?
We've put in a very quick interim measure, so there is a callback facility now. And what we're starting to do is look at the time that people were and what we had as previous performance around abandonment rates. The new digital platform will hopefully enable people to do channel shift, callback systems. We'd like to get to a stage where you can start to populate the details in readiness for the operator to deal with it. If I was to say our current system is quite old, it's quite antiquated, I think that's an understatement actually. It is an analogue system, so I think I'm quite excited by the prospect of getting some new digital telephony platform in place. It's long overdue.
Okay. Are there any further? Manjula?
I say thank you very much. I know this has tremendously improved. Otherwise, the constituents, they come and tell you, so far there have been less complaints. The Crime Stoppers, they promote that people can make an anonymous call if the crime happens. So that call, because you said you've got currently 31 different routes. So where is that call goes? Does it come back to the police or Crime Stoppers, or do they get in touch with you?
Crime Stoppers is a separate process, so it will go into them. They're independent, and invariably they will then pass the information through to us, which is anonymised, and then we work it up from there. And we generally tend to look for some sort of supportive, cooperative work before we act on it, because obviously people do make malicious, pass information into Crime Stoppers maliciously. So we try to triangulate it before we act on it, but it's not to do with the internal police sort of telephony platform. The 33 routes, what we're trying to do is simplify them and make it very much victim and service orientated rather than business orientated, so that actually it should provide a better business experience for the user of the service.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any further questions, and so in that case I'm going to move on to agenda item 9, which is an update on Project Darwin, and the Police and Crime Commissioner is to present, I understand.
Yes, he is, because, if I may say so, in his presence he has played a really crucial role in Project Darwin, the way it's being formed. You'll all remember the Edison way. Op Edison came into being, gosh, it seems a long time ago, but I think it was only 2015. That was done because of lack of resource. It was before November 2015 when there was a change about resource. And we've looked very carefully, police have looked very carefully at what's happened in the course of the last 2 years. And there clearly were faults in the Edison system, and they were showing a lot. And that's why, in order to deal with the increase in demand and the way in which Edison wasn't working, very sensibly, police have been looking at a revision of Edison, and that's what Op Darwin is, but in a very important way. We actually, the reason that Rob is here today mainly is as the author, really, in many ways, of the Darwin proposal. So, with your permission, Chair, I'll pass on to him.
Please, Rob.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take it as read that you've read the paper, so I'm not going to talk too much to it. I'm just going to talk off the top of my head. You have been saved a very, very sort of whizzy PowerPoint, so there's your bonus for the day. Can I just sort of just pick up on a few things around the Edison model and put it into context for you? In 2014, obviously, the force worked with KPMG. There was a great emphasis on the importance of economies of scale and centralisation. Most of us would recognise that sort of management steer. A lot of functions were centralised to absorb what at that time was a £10.2 million savings. That was delivered. So Edison, in its guise, did deliver £10.2 million worth of savings. But as a consequence of that, there was a lot of unintended sort of if you like, unintended consequences. Some of it was, we then saw some, it's a very sort of elongated process. There was multiple handoffs. There was a lack of local accountability, lack of ownership. And we generally felt that that was leading to a decline. So whilst financially it was more efficient, from a service perspective and local accountability, it was becoming more problematic. And with some conversations between the Chief and Lord Back, it was agreed that we would commission a new review of the Edison and look at what an evolution of that operating model would consist of. That also took into account that there were some assumptions made by KPMG back in 2015, which centred very much and heavily on that demand would come down. Well, actually, it's totally the opposite. Demand has continued to go up. So it was timely to have a look at victim focus and to try and address some of the inefficiencies in the fact that demand was increasing. So what is effectively Darwin about is very much around a decentralisation. And in your paper, if I sort of draw your attention to, one of the key bits is around the development of a neighbourhood investigation unit. Put very simply, under the Edison model, there were 3 investigative hubs, primarily based around our custody facilities. There was a managed appointment unit that was centrally based that would go out and do diarised appointments, and there was what we talked about, a management unit, investigative management unit, which was a desk-based unit. What we're talking here is all of those are being collapsed, and those assets are all being decentralised to be put out to work along and co-locate with neighbourhood officers in localities. So where at the moment they're working from custody facilities around places like Beaumont Leys and Keam Lane, there will still be a presence in those locations for obvious reasons, but we will also have a presence out at places like Hinckley, Melton, Market Harborough, because what we are seeing is that people that were centrally based were continually driving out to Melton to then drive back to a centrally based location, hugely inefficient, not at all supportive of the victim, and the local sort of responsibility got lost. So neighbourhood investigation units, it's not rocket science. This is collapsing down 3 units into one, decentralising it and putting it back out into localities to work closer with neighbourhood teams. Point 1. The second point, which is point 9 in the report, is response. What we are seeing, and I use today as an example, I've walked in, the force is on State Amber. It's a cascade system. The demand that is coming through on our 9s and our 101 is increased significantly. There is not sufficient resource currently in our response to deal with that level of volume. So we're going to have to look to reinvest some additional staff into our response function. And what we're looking to do is, and at the moment, and again, they're working from some centralised hub locations, we'd like to introduce a satellite hub, again, out in some of those rural locations. So when I talked about the visible presence of staff in those rural locations, we will be looking to have people start and finish as response officers at places like Melton, Hinckley, for example, where currently they start from a different location. So in order for us to do that and to meet the increasing demand, we are looking to collapse down some of our proactive units, take some of them out and put them back into response, just so that actually when people, I think it's really important, people need our help and they pick up the phone, they expect the police to get there and do something about it. And I think we fail people if we don't do that. So as much as I can have people in jeans and T-shirts and kicking doors and doing warrants every day, if we don't turn up when people call us, I think that's a failing. So I think we've recognised that we need to put that additional resource in. So that point, paragraph 9, deals with the uplift in staff going into to response. And then paragraph 10, what we are seeing, and I think this is really, really telling, is back in 2015, we was spending about £5 million a year looking for missing people per year. That has seen a significant increase in missing persons. The complexity around missing people is gone up by 81%, and the high-risk cases of people going missing is up by 173%. And in any one day, so this morning, I've walked in, there's 2 high-risk missing persons, and it's 11:15. So, and yeah, there's a great correlation between children, not always looked after children, but of 3% of the people that are going missing equate to 35% of the demand. So there's a significant issue for us to address. So what this is proposing is that we are looking to set up 2 sections to deal with that. One is a greater coordination centrally, so you've got a consistency of approach. It's more efficient rather than keep handing off from different teams. And the second part of it is that we are looking to develop a multi-agency approach to the problem solving around key locations. No surprise to people in here, there are a number of key locations across the city and county where there are people going missing daily, and it needs a more joined up multi-agency problem solving approach rather than what we're currently doing, which is very reactionary. So paragraph 10 refers to a new approach to missing people, and then paragraph 11 really is the final bit which talks about the crime recording, and I think we've sort of strayed into that territory with the CDI discussion. But the key bit I would say is there is an investment at the front end when people call us into the contact management centre. We're looking at a technological solution that will automatically capture if it's a crime or not, so there can be no issues around not capturing it as a crime. We've invested some further supervisors at the front end, crime managers locally, and then the crime quality assurance at the back end, which I think is the question that you asked. Paragraph 11 effectively is about addressing the crime recording issues. And I feel I've done a really sort of quick tour through what is Darwin. Key dates, 23rd of October is when we would look to go live with the people coming out, so you will start to see people back in local areas from the 23rd. The missing from home and the response, we're looking to try and get some proposals, get those signed off. But in my head, new digital telephony platform, response, and missing from home by the end of November. So we've got the new operating model up and running before Christmas. The caveat I would say, I think a huge amount of work has been done very, very quickly. It is part of the answer, not the answer. Because what I would say is it is better than what we've got, but resourcing is a real challenge.
Thank you. I have 4 speakers or 4 questions here and some comments first from me, though. I'm very, very pleased to note along with County and others, your multidisciplinary teams and your interaction with them in terms of missing persons in all sorts of ways, and I commend that. I've been to the particular centre and looked at it working, and it works extremely well. Good luck with that one. A general point, you're still clinging to the hubs idea, so what I think, Lord Bark, you're saying is that you want a consistency of approach. Although you put the teams out in the localities, you're still managing them, but not from one centre. You're actually managing them, am I right, from outside? They're not in control, though, of the LPU commander. Am I right on that?
The MPA commanders will have a significant role. I think there is a discussion taking place at the moment about the day-to-day management. I see very much will come under the control of the MPA commanders locally, the local inspector. So, and there will be a supportive role of the detective inspector, because effectively you've got a hybrid model, but the MPA will have the day-to-day.
Thank you. I'm more assured with that than I was when I first read the paper of the rollout in Darwin. Councillor Rickman.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just a comment, really. I think this is, we did have a briefing of it from Lord Bach at the CSP Chairs meeting, and I think this is a really forward-thinking operation. I think we have to be proactive, not reactive. And for me, the key thing about this is the increase in visibility. This has to dissuade criminality. It has to give confidence to the public. And I think that is a massive, massive thing for this operation to actually take on board.
Alan Walker.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have a 3-point question, but perhaps we can avoid it by asking for a point of clarification instead. My local inspector has advised me that the decentralisation will be to Market Harborough, but the Speaker has mentioned decentralising to Melton Mowbray. Can he confirm that, in which case I may not need to ask the question?
Okay, the decentralisation of the investigative part is definitely for Market Harborough. We're still working through the response bit, but there will be a response presence at Market Harborough without a shadow of a doubt.
Are you comfortable with that, Councillor?
No, I'm not, Chair, if I may come back with that. So I suppose the question to Lord Back is he comfortable in his oversight of this development that he did not ask the operational staff to consult with the local authorities on how this project should develop and where these hubs should be? And based on the comments made earlier that the police would be based in the heart of the community, would he advise me how I can convince the residents and members in Rutland that Market Harborough is at the heart of the community of Rutland? And thirdly, in these days of agile working, do they really need to be physically located in one building, which was the excuse given to me by our local inspector that they could not physically fit the officers into Melton Mowbray? Why do they need to be physically located in one building in these days of modern technology?
Lord Bark.
It may not be in the heart of Rutland, but I tell you what, it's better to be in Market Harborough, for Rutland's point of view, than being at Keam Lane or Beaumont Leys or Euston Street. It's better than being in Leicester. And quite clearly our problem has been in terms of response. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if people in Rutland, when there's a response needed to an immediate crime, complain at the present time that it takes too long for the police sometimes to arrive. This was clearly going to be better. It's not ideal, and it's not going to be forever, because we have to move forward with how events are playing out. But frankly, I leave the operational matters, of course, to the police. I've been very much involved in either agreeing or not agreeing with the principles behind Darwin, and I have to say, I think this is a so much better system than the one that we've enjoyed, if that is definitely the wrong word, for the last 2 years with Edison, where the complaint has been, not just from Rutland, but from other parts of the county, that it just takes too long for the police to respond when they're urgently needed. And I think the whole issue around neighbourhood policing, where all over the place, including Rutland, there have been complaints that they don't see enough neighbourhood policemen. Here, this new system may not assist Rutland particularly, but it will mean that if a crime is committed in Rutland, that a response in most cases can be got to much quicker than it was before. So I'm putting my backing for this to give it a go, and I very much hope that all parts of the county and Rutland will do the same. We have got to move forward from Edison. What was happening with Edison, truthfully, was that where there was demand and not enough response, or other things needed to be done, beat officers were taken off the neighbourhood beat, and that's a very important part of what happens in Rutland, were taken off and made to do something more urgent. And that meant that the beat system wasn't working as well as it should. Neighbourhood beat officers' numbers are being retained. That's really important to know. And I think that's very important for Rutland as it is for everywhere else.
Thank you. Helen?
Thank you, Chair. I actually welcome Up Darwin in lots of ways. I always thought that Up Edison was a step too far, but understand the reasons why it had to be done at the time. So thank goodness we're seeing more people go back into neighbourhoods, so I welcome that. My question, Lord Buck, is around how that's going to how you're going to work with partners in a multi-agency approach. We've touched on it already, and I want to bring it up again about priority and prolific offenders, because if 20% of people are committing 80% of the crime, and there are reasons behind that, so it could be around drug and alcohol addiction, for an example, then what are we doing with partners? And I am specifically thinking about those ones that are part of, or should be part of, a community safety partnership, and probation is the one I'm going to highlight here, about how we work with them. Because what's happening is, and I completely take the point of what Rob was saying, that you end up trying to desperately deal with these people, but actually what's happening is something's not being addressed somewhere, be it drug and alcohol services, be it probation managing those offenders. And a lot of these may be coming on very short-term sentences anyway, so therefore aren't appropriate for certain services that they really need, i.e. drug and alcohol, and managing them properly. And it's impacting on things like burglary and those acquisitive crimes. You only have to look at the statistics around theft from vehicle. To me, acquisitive crime says exactly that. It's people that need money. Why do they need the money? There's a reason. I have to say that on the streets of where I work and in other towns that I've been, I am seeing a lot more people dependent on drug and alcohol that are just littering the streets. And I actually feel for them because I know that there are needs there and they need to be addressed because it's an illness. But in terms of also...
Helen, just the question to Lord Bark.
Right, OK, and it's the victims. So my question is around working with partners. What is your plan in terms of Op Darwin and making sure that those partners are part of that and taking you on that journey in a multi-agency approach? Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. We disagreed about something a bit earlier. I absolutely agree with what you said on this. The partnership is the multi-agency. The partnership is absolutely crucial. This afternoon, the strategic, the SPB meets, and we'll be discussing Darwin and demand generally. I am as concerned as you are about the failure, frankly, of part at least of the probation service to do its vital job in this whole area of offender management and preventing crime. It just seems to me that we're sometimes too polite to talk about the fact that it's doesn't appear sometimes to be functional at all in terms of exactly the sort of person you're talking about who commits I call it low-level crime rather than the really serious stuff on the whole, is a complete nuisance. Melton, I think, is an example. I've talked to Melise about this many occasions. Complete example. You know who they are. Community safety partnerships know who they are. The partnership element around Darwin is absolutely critical. And I think it's the next thing. We have to make the SPB into a real partnership board across the... But that's not easy to do if, for example, the CRC part of probation that deals with the less serious crime aren't there, aren't at the meeting. What can we do? Yes, they're invited. What can we do? And I'm really seized about this. I'm really upset about this because I don't see how partnership can work without probation, for example. Thank you. Can I pass on to Rob? You might have something more practical to say.
It's your call, but I've still got two more speakers.
I'll keep it really brief. For the second time, I'm going to say I'm actually quite excited because this afternoon we are going to take a presentation around demand. And when you start to overlay it, there are some obvious locations and there's some obvious people that we need to be joining together to work on. And the proposal this afternoon is very much about reviewing what good practice is already developing. My sense is that there are pockets, but it's not systemic. And what we need to do is look at where we've got the high individuals, the high problematic locations, have we got the effective structures in to make sure the information is being shared, the right members are sat around the table and they can actually make a meaningful difference. And I think that this afternoon is part of that journey about just setting out what that looks like.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Slater.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I thank Rob for his work on Op Darwin? It's really good and I'm very pleased to see it. Particularly, I'd like to welcome the NIUs and the visibility that creates, because as councillors, as members of the community, this is what we get all the while, the requirement for visibility. My question is quite simple. Are these officers that are now in the NIUs dedicated to the NIU, or are they subject to extraction to ease pressures created elsewhere in the system? Because if they are constantly being extracted, then the effect of the visibility is somewhat diluted.
Okay, I mean, there's always going to have to be an operational need that we might have to redeploy people. I mean, that's fact. But actually, because of the volume of the work that they're going to be managing, we go there at the last resort. And I also think what we would start to see and what we will see within the NIUs is they will become often the primary responder. So they will respond to the incident and they will retain the investigative ownership of it, which has sadly been lacking because it's been handed from different people. So I get a sense that there may always be an occasion where we need to attract them, but generally the principle will be they're dealing with the local crime. They need to be there, and if we were to change their remit slightly, it would be that we want them to go to the incident rather than response, and we want them to take ownership from the outset.
I think that's key. Thank you very much. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. Rob, you effectively, I may paraphrase a little, moved from some proactive work to more responsive work. The danger, if I may, is what you were doing proactively. If you don't do it now, you're not going to do it. So you get further and further behind, and at some point that you'll actually stop preventing crime and actually just respond to it. So how are you going to balance that out in the longer term?
I think it's a real challenge. I'm going to be really honest with you. When you start to look at, I've always been a great fan, and those that have worked with me, you need a proactive capability. And then that's different to a preventative capability. So a proactive in terms of enforcement overt and covert we need. I think we've looked at different ways we can realign the resource, and I'm confident that we have still got some capability. We need to work differently with some of our regional assets and make sure that we're getting everything out of that. I think the challenge will come over the next 18 months. We need to bring that demand down, and the only way we can bring that demand down is to get into that preventative space, and that's about working with partners around where that demand is coming through from. So I think the developmental work that I'd like to see is very much around how we build capacity with partners to do preventative and problem solving. Some of that has started, and I need to do an acknowledgement of the CSPs with people will know that we now have city and county sat on our force tasking. So this is new, it's happened over the recent months, and as a consequence of looking at force tasking issues, stuff is now going out, and I'm really grateful that CSPs have been involved in some of the ATM thefts. So it's that bit that I think we will start to strengthen hopefully over the next few months.
Thank you. Ratilal.
Thank you, Chair. I think mine is an operational question, Rob, if I may, Chair, on that basis, especially around the alcoholism, especially towards the young generation, around the parks and that area. I know my neighbourhood teams are doing an excellent job, but as Operation Darwin, they're a nuisance to the resident of the area. How are you tackling that issue, especially around the young people, because they've already been nuisance around these festival days, festival period as well, and that has caused a quite bit of differences in the issues around that. And the finger's been pointed at Mr. A and Mr. B have done this, and how do we tackle that issue around that?
Okay, I mean, I think there's two issues. There's the real day-to-day response stuff that I think is fairly our bread and butter, and I can gladly take that offline and talk that through with you, Rattler, and make sure you've got what you need.
I really would appreciate that if you wouldn't mind, Rob, because really this is the police and crime commissioners show, and we don't want to stray into operational. Okay, finally, Manjula.
Thank you, Chair. Two of the questions have already been asked, which I want to. The first, the comment I said, especially on the report 7, 8, and 14, which I really welcome your commitment that the neighbourhood policing team will be there. And in the city, we have got ward community meetings where every meeting the police comes and gives their report, and which is a good practice, and we would like that to continue. And the local, our inspectors are very good now through emails. They keep us informed before, and that has helped to diffuse many situations. Will that continue? And the Gold Community meeting, which I'm more concerned, is about where all the communities, especially faith communities, you keep us engaged and you inform them. So that these sort of things, I know they are resource strained. You have said that already resources. So this,
Manjit.
And the last question which I want to ask is on the equality impact assessment. When you finish that, so the panel would like to see that. And on that, I know we talk about safeguard partnerships here, but out there for public, it's more important to have neighbourhood watch schemes.
Manjula, Manjit is obviously your inspector now in the city centre, as you know. All of that we've put in place will continue because we think that that's really good practice. And whilst we're talking about Darwin going live on the 23rd of October, we've actually been evolving into it. So some of the stuff that we've put in place to address the concerns that were taking place in the city centre, they'll continue. My reassurance to you is that there is nothing within Darwin that will take away the way that we work with partners. In fact, we want to strengthen it. And the fact that inspectors are engaging with email and communication, I want to encourage more of that because I think that's what it's about.
Thank you.
I would like to say thank you for Diwali's coming, which is one of the largest celebration open. And Chair, I would like to invite all of you to come on the Switch On Lights, which is on 8th Sunday, and it's not possible without police's help on the operational side. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjula, for the invite. I'm sure we'll look at our diaries very carefully. Okay, and if we can, we will. That's lovely. If there's no more then, I'm going to, as you know, remove 10 till last and now go to 11, which is the venues for panel meetings for the future. And Ewan has written this paper, and I'm just going to ask him to introduce it quickly. Ewan?
Yep, so at the panel meeting in September 2016, the panel considered venues for the meetings. And up till that point, all the meetings have been held here at County Hall, mainly because the County Council is the host authority and the Secretariat is based here, and we also have the webcasting facilities and the room. So at that meeting in September 2016, it was decided to hold a trial where 2 of the 6 meetings in the year 2017 would be held at City Hall. So those meetings have taken place. So we had those 2 meetings at City Hall in March and July, I think it was. So what I wanted to do now is decide whether the trial now becomes a permanent arrangement or whether we come up with some other arrangements, whether we come back to having all our 6 meetings a year at County Hall, or whether we have less meetings at City Hall, or stick with the 2. So I wanted to get all the rooms booked for next year, so that's why I brought it to this meeting. So it's up to the panel how they wish to proceed with this going forward.
Thank you, Ewan. Comments and questions, please, from the panel. Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's worked going to the city, but I think if you look at the analysis of the trial on page 68, it clearly is easier here. So I'd just recommend that all meetings are held here at County. I think the city halls have their place for some of the meetings that are held around the community, but I think this one works here at County, so that would be my recommendation.
Abdul?
On the contrary, Chair, I think you'd expect me to say that. But I think the points need to be made that the paper, if you read the paper, is very, very subjectively saying to members that, everything fails at the city. The parking's no good, the webcast doesn't work, there's issues of, taking trolleys of papers to the actual meeting. But my question really is, how many people watch the webcast in relation to, I know it's new technology and everything else, and people do catch up. I know there's a lot of anoraks out there in relation to watching the webcast, but it's not a failure. I mean, we have our continuous meetings at the city, and it is fairly accessible. Over and above the car park at Rutland Street, you've got the Haymarket, and you've also got Dover Street. Plus, you've got on-street parking. So I don't think parking should be an actual issue. And I think as far as the city is concerned, it should be balanced in relation to we should have meetings and we should continue to have meetings at the city where this is a force that represents not only the county but the city and also Rutland as well at the same time. So, I mean, we're going to obviously vote against it and recommend that we continue to have the trial basis and continue to have meetings at the city.
Okay. Ratilal?
I think I would echo, because it was last time I raised that concern, and I'm grateful to the panel that a trial period was set up. I think we also have, if we look at we also have fire authority meeting take place. There is no issue or no agenda around the parking or other technology point of view. Why is it a difference on the PCC panel? So I'll echo what Councillor Osman has said, and I think we should have a balance of the meeting. I've raised that before, and I'm raising that again, that it should be a balance, not just at one place, but city as well, because we represent both city, county, and rural area.
Okay, well, I'm nothing on the table at the moment, but I'm going to go to Nick.
Chairman. Attend the constituent authorities, and as Councillor Rutland's pointed out, and the fire authority, we even managed to do one a year in Rutland, and we only have 4 or 5 there. So I think it's beholden on us that even we go to the city, we put up with the bad parking, we put up with no webcasting if they haven't got it, because I think it shows us in a good light that you go around your constituent authorities, and if you could speak to Rutland and say once every 2 years go to Rutland, that would show us in a good light as well. So I'll formally move that we do 4 at the county and 2 at the city.
Thank you, Nick. Have I anyone who would like to second that? Abdul, you are prepared to second that. Thank you. Look, with that on the table, I'm not going to go any further, except I'm going to ask now for those in favour of the proposition. John, okay, if you want to.
Sorry, what I was going to say was I think actually we need to think about the purpose of the meeting. I was going to, the moment Nick said that he would propose, I would have happily seconded it when I spoke. I think the issue is that we need to think about how we engage with the public in these meetings. Putting it bluntly, it doesn't actually matter which building we're in if nobody else comes. What matters is we need to get it out into the community, and it may well be that we need to look at, I accept Nick's view of going to Rutland. I also believe we probably need to travel it around the county over a period of time. So I think we need to do a further piece of work looking at how we make this meeting more accessible and frankly more interesting to the public, and maybe we need to also advertise it. So I think we need to do a little bit further than Nick said, but basically I totally agree with Nick.
Thank you. I've still not got anything contrary to Nick's proposal, and I think unless anybody's violently against this, I'm going to put this to the vote now. You really do, Alan? Oh, you're violently against this, are you? Okay.
Only very briefly. I don't want to delay the meeting any further. Chairman, it's just a building, and the most efficient building is where the Secretariat is at. I appreciate the comments in terms of turning out to the city or indeed to Rutland, but it's just a room.
Thank you. We note the observation. However, there is a proposition on the table now, and I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour of the proposition that we maintain the status quo 4-2, please show now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and myself 8. Against? 5 against. So the proposition is carried that we maintain the status quo. Thank you. Right. Did I miscount? Please do.
Sorry, in the report it's saying about car parking being £12. That's on Halford Street. If you go to Dover Street, it's only £3 or £4. It's totally different. I understand there's implications for claiming expenses, but also about dropping off papers. There is a drop-off zone right outside the City Council offices, so there's not a problem there, I don't believe.
Okay. I think we will bow to your city's superior knowledge, Stephen, and ask that if you're appraisers of that, we'd be delighted to take advantage of it. And, of course, the paper drop-off too would be important. Thank you. Michael?
Just a point of accuracy, Chair, I think there were 6 against.
I never was numerate, and thank you then, Michael, if that is the case. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last item, the independent members of the Police and Crime Panel. The Secretary, Ewan, will present it. We'll say goodbye to you for now. Helen.
Would you mind terribly if you said goodbye to us as well? Because it's obviously an important matter, but really nothing to do with me or my office at all. But I don't want to leave if you think I should stay.
It's absolutely super. Thank you. We're indebted to you. And
can I just say, it was really exciting when I heard that the leader of the county council was going to be present today. I'm not so excited now, I have to say.
Good experience, though, Lord Bark. Yes. Okay. All right. I really do want to go straight to 11, Ratilal, if that's okay. Sorry? Okay. A comfort break has been requested. I'm prepared to allow 5 minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, comfort break over, and we're now on agenda item 10, which we've moved to the last item of the day, which is the appointment of, to consider the appointment of independent co-opted members of this panel. And I'm going to hand over to Ian.
So as we've got some relatively new members of the panel, I just thought I'd explain how the composition of the panel works. So each authority in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland gets one member of the panel. Plus we also have what's called co-opted members. And there's two types of co-opted members. So we have firstly councillors. So when the panel was set up in 2012, it was decided that because Leicester City had a large proportion of the population of Leicestershire, that we would co-opt 3 additional councillors from Leicester City. Hence, we now have 4 members from Leicester City on the panel. So then we also have what's called independent members. These are not councillors, these are ordinary members of the public. And the legislation says that you can have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4. So when the panel was set up in 2012, it was decided to have 2 independent members of the Leicestershire and Rutland Police and Crime panel. So there was a recruitment process, adverts were sent out, various people applied. We had a sub-panel of 5 members who carried out the recruitment and interviewing assessment process. I believe, Mr. Pendleton, you were involved in that. And as a result of that process, Helen Carter and Colonel Robert Martin were appointed as the 2 independent panel members, and they were appointed for a period of 4 years commensurate with the term of office of the PCC. So the issue came back to the panel in the beginning of 2016 when the 4-year period ran out, and the panel gave consideration to, again, whether we should extend the term of the 2 members or how to proceed with this. The panel decided that Helen Carter and Colonel Robert Martin had made a good contribution to the work of the panel over the previous 4 years, so they decided to appoint for a further 4 years. So Helen Carter and Robert Martin were appointed until 2020. However, there were some discussions at that meeting about the length of the term of those independent members. I don't know, some of you may remember that were at that meeting. And the main issue was that actually having it as the same term as that of the Police and Crime Commissioner, it meant that when you had a new Crime Commissioner, you had new independent members as well. So there was too much new people around the panel at the same time. So it was considered that we'd go away and look at that and consider whether to stagger the process more. So I've now brought the issue back to the panel again today, partly at the request of some of the city members. So I've set out the options at paragraph 10 of my report. It's not an exclusive list, so you can mix and match if you so wish. So your 2 issues to consider are, A, do we wish to continue with Helen Carter and Robert Martin as the independent members on the panel, or do we wish to re-advertise? Obviously, Helen and Robert would be able to reapply. So that's one issue, is the personnel. Your other issue is the length of the term and whether you want to have it staggered or the same as that of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So if you did want to increase the number of panel members, we would need to get approval from the Secretary of State, which would require me to fill out a form. I just have to explain briefly why we wanted to expand our membership. Other panels in other parts of the country have done so. Nottinghamshire has 4 independent panel members. So those are your options. So I'll leave it up to the panel to decide how you want to proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to call Nick Rushton.
Thank you, Chairman. I've read the report and listened to what Ewan's saying. First of all, I don't think there's any need for any more members on this panel. We've got plenty as it is. It'll just end up as a huge talking shop. I think Helen and Colonel Martin have done well. Helen in particular was very good today, I thought. But having said that, I think the best thing to do is to go for 10B, and they be appointed for 4 years from now. That will give them some overlap with a new PCP, so there's some continuity, because obviously district leaders and county leaders can change. So I'll go 10B with serving for 4 years. The only thing I'd disagree with, I don't think it needs 5 of you to pick 2 independent members. I'd have thought 1 city, 1 county, and whoever else you pick would be plenty. So I'll formally move that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Slater. Okay, so 10B has been formally... I beg your pardon? Yeah, 10B has been formally proposed.
With the 4 years and a panel of 3, not 5.
And a panel of 3,
City, 1 county, and
not 5. And now is the...
I'm sorry. It would probably be best to reflect the constituent authorities, not to dump on Rutland, but Rutland should be part of the recruitment process. To be a city, county and Rutland, if you're going to try and encourage constituent authorities to be part of all processes, which, as you know, Trevor, what to do at the Fire Authority.
Thank you. Okay. So that includes a panel of 3 to include a city member, a county member and a Rutland member. Okay. Now, I do have Councillor Slater, like a word?
Nick has said most of what I wanted to say, but insofar I will just reiterate that I think if we extend this panel, it becomes unwieldy. And I like the focus this panel has now, and I'd hate us to lose that focus. I think we've seen the effectiveness of Mrs. Carter today, and that is her contribution, her level of contribution in every meeting, as it is Colonel Martin's. I understand Colonel Martin is not quite so well. I'm not sure whether his health will permit, but that's entirely up to him if we go ahead with Nick's proposals. So that is why I'd like to second Nick's proposal.
Thank you. And Abdul?
Thank you, Chair. I did ask, in terms of this paper initially, to be brought to the panel, and I'm grateful that it wasn't discussed at the last meeting, with me not being there, and it's been deferred for today. I do appreciate that as well. But I think at the same time it needs to be reflected that, you know, we had observations in terms of the representation of co-opted members that came onto the panel that needed to be independent, impartial, and obviously geographically representing the areas and diverse as well. And I think those are the points that I'd just like to make. And yeah, we will be supporting what Nick's put forward, and I think that's the move that we will go with. Thanks.
Thank you, Abdul. And I do take the ethnicity angle too, and I'm sure that is quite overt in the terms of reference, and will be, of course, when we advertise. Any further comments from anyone? Otherwise, if we are quite clear, Ratila, would you want to add anything else?
No, I think it was me originally that has brought this issue up last time, and I'm grateful to the chair that it was deferred again to where we had more thinking. Just a point where I think Abdul has echoed that, and I think I echo what Nick has said, and let's move forward on that basis. And if, you know, nothing is in personality on the Helen or Colonel, I think we need to have a balanced agenda, and if they want to apply for it, they're welcome to apply for it and go through the procedures that we need to go.
Thank you. And we did want and need your support and input, and which I'm grateful that we've now managed to get today, and that's super. Thank you very much. Right, so we... was it Lee? Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask, if you're going with B, do the independent members cease immediate as well? Yeah, okay, thank you.
The answer is yes. Okay, so having that proposed and seconded, can I ask...
Can clarify? I no problem with 10B, but I think in terms of timing, it would seem to me to be appropriate that their term of office ran from the 1st of January, and therefore the current two continue till the 31st of December.
Actually, you're quite right. Probably structurally we wouldn't be able to, procedurally we wouldn't quite be able to manage it before then, so that would be apposite, and that means they do come to one more meeting in their original right. No dissenters? Okay.
I think I'll second what John has said.
I think I take it that we are actually unanimous. I'm not even going to take a vote on this. I'm going to say that we are unanimous unless told otherwise. We are. Thank you very much, panel. And finally, can I bring to your attention the dates of the next meetings at 12, and they are also detailed on the orange sheet for your diaries, so you can take them away. And with that, I'm going to thank you.
Just the city meetings, could they be slightly later? Because it is slightly harder for deeply rural like Rutland to get into the middle. Can you do an hour later or not, or is that not something you consider?
The reason why we normally have the meetings at 1 o'clock is, I understand, mainly relating to Mrs. Carter, who has childcare collection issues. So,
the morning,
our morning's better. Our morning's better.
I think to me it's not an issue. We don't have that agenda.
Chairman, if I may, I I initially raised this matter due to the timing of today's meeting rather than the 1 o'clock meetings.
So your concern is I think
avoiding this sort of time,
avoiding 10 traffic
from the
lights.
sticks. Chairman.
I do understand. I do understand. It is tricky. Okay, so we're looking really, I think, then probably in terms of going for a 1, and that gives the best compromise for everyone. We'll attempt to look at and see if 1 will take us forward for the next season of meetings. With that, thank you very much, members, for your attendance and deliberations today.